first of all, there's an interesting contrast that we've seen in the rhetoric between this government and its policy. The chairman of the Conservative Party, Andrew Dowden, gave a speech at the US think tank Heritage earlier this week, decrying cancel culture and impressing upon the audience the importance of freedom of speech. Yet in the online harm legislation upcoming in the House of Commons soon, exactly the opposite tack is being taken. Yes, the bill encourages the dismantling and even making off of the internet legal but harmful speech. On the one hand, the politicians are shouting the virtues of free speech. On the other hand, they're legislating to dismantle it. What on earth is going on? Well, let's talk to Sam Dumitriu, the research director at the Entrepreneurs Network, for more on this issue. Sam, it's extraordinary listening to that contrast between what Oliver Dowden was saying and what the online harms bill is actually doing.
Yeah, so what's currently being discussed and currently under proposal is the idea that Ofcom would have the power to actively force tech companies to monitor content that is legal but harmful and take it down. At the moment, when it comes to any sort of content, there are a few exceptions, but pretty much all content, even if it is offending, even if it's illegal, the onus is typically on someone to report it to the tech company and then the tech company to take it down once they're notified. And this is a really important protection for the internet, because it means effectively if you're liable for anything that's on there and you haven't spotted it and you haven't been told that this is there, then what that means is you're going to have to go actively hunting out for it. And because you're going to be risk averse, because you're probably going to be a profit making company, your main interest is the bottom line here, you're going to take down much more content than actually needs be. I'll give you an example. I criticised someone on housing policy, and I told them that their views on housing crisis were the equivalent of someone saying that vaccines contain microchips. My Twitter account was suspended for a day, and the reason for that was Twitter was saying, okay, we're going to take down misinformation, we're going to be proactive, and we're going to have some software pick out various sayings and various phrases. The problem is, it doesn't understand irony, doesn't understand the power of quotation marks. If we could teach computers this, we could probably unlock a lot of innovation and do lots of amazing things. But currently the technology is not there. And I think that actually speaks to something more broad that goes on with government when they approach issues of technology. It's kind of an arrogance, especially from the Home Office. You know, I think I remember Amber Rudd saying, I don't need to understand encryption to understand it helps terrorists. And you see these sort of bold pronouncements about technological areas where there are actually serious matters of, is something feasible? Does something work? If I say that everyone has to take down all legal but harmful content, will this actually be implementable in a way that isn't completely unacceptable to the public in practice? And they just don't take that seriously. And this is going to be a terrible case of that if they're going to tell big tech companies to effectively implement some software that scans through all your tweets, scans through all your Facebook posts or whatever, and it takes them down if it thinks there's a risk that it's going to be offensive in any way or legal but harmful, which is such a broad and vague category. It's not a legal category by definition. So that's going to be a real problem.
Let's explore what legal but harmful means then, because it is such a vague phrase. I can think of lots of things that some people might say are harmful to them, but other people might disagree and say, no, that's fine, or that's a joke. What on earth is legal but harmful?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, and I don't think it's one that the government really knows the answer to. The Law Commission criticised the concept of legal but harmful. They proposed something called harm-based offence, which, again, I think is better than legal but harmful because it at least gives it some sort of form of definition. But ideally, I think our current laws on free speech already probably are quite restrictive. We don't need to introduce more restrictions on what types of content. I mean, there are sort of sensible things potentially in this online harms bill. You know, there's trying to get Facebook to do more about like obvious scams that people are using. That's reasonable. But the issue is when you sort of define what one person says is abusive and harassing, and another person says is legitimate debate. I'm sure you get a lot of this on Twitter, Tom. I get a tiny bit, but I think you probably get a bit more. But what some people would consider a reasonable objection or a reasonable argument, other people would consider offensive or abusive. And so constantly you're asking not the law to define what this is, but companies, and then companies doing it in the most risk-averse way, because fundamentally they don't want to get fined, they don't want to get sued, they don't want to get in trouble.
And isn't this the problem here? We're talking about not just a moral issue, really, about being able to say what we really want to say online, being able to say even legal things online that may now be made illegal, but the implication for innovation and the implication for tech companies that may well see Britain as becoming a place that's hostile to innovation and hostile to creating new tech companies, for example.
100%. So I think one thing that has been underplayed, at least in the government's discussion, but if you have a requirement that companies proactively monitor everyone's posts, they're collecting all this data, they're analysing it and trying to take down content, very likely this doesn't interact very well with GDPR. You might say, why does that matter? We've left the EU, surely we can make our own laws. Well, we want to trade with the EU. We want to be able to transfer data from the UK to the EU and back and forth, because that is very, very important to digital innovation. So if you bring this in, potentially you're breaking the GDPR regulation, and as a result, tech companies say, well, I like the UK, I'm happy to do stuff in the UK, but fundamentally there are a lot more people in Europe I can sell to, so why should I stay... why should I follow the UK law, which is going to imperil my ability to work with those people? So that's a real problem. And then you just have to think, what about the smaller platforms? How are they going to be able to interact with these content filters? How are they going to be able to deal with these obligations? It's very easy to say Facebook, who can spend billions literally on moderation, are able to deal with it. But what about the company that wants to be the next Facebook? You know, someone like Clubhouse or TikTok a few years back, or, you know, whatever the next big thing is.
This legislation might be shutting down a sort of more competitive internet. We all complain about the tech giants, but actually some of the tech giants are more supportive of this legislation. And it might well embed those old players. It's really, really concerning. But Sam, thank you so much for talking us through some of the nuts and bolts of this mammoth piece of legislation there. Sam Dumitriu, Research Director at the Entrepreneurs Network.